The Health Ministry confirms that the Royal Caribbean cruise passenger does not have Covid-19, despite initially testing positive.
From nurses and doctors to swabbers, 5,500 jobs and training opportunities in healthcare are up for grabs.
And talks are underway to merge Cathay and Golden Village cinemas in what would become the largest cinema operator here.
Welcome to The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quek.
I'm Hairianto Dimana. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. The Royal Caribbean cruise passenger does not have Covid-19.
That's right, the 83-year-old Singaporean man had tested positive while on board the Quantum of the Seas, but the Health Ministry said that his final test taken today confirms he doesn't have the virus.
This confirmatory test follows two PCR tests conducted yesterday by the National Public Health Laboratory. One was a retest of its original sample and the other on a fresh sample taken yesterday. Both tests came back negative.
MOH also said it has rescinded the quarantine orders of the passengers' close contacts who had earlier been placed on quarantine as a precautionary measure while investigations were ongoing. The ministry will also support the laboratory on board the cruise ship in its review of its testing processes. Meanwhile, the Singapore Tourism Board said Singapore's pilot for safe cruises will continue as planned.
Let's get an expert's opinion on this. Joining us now is Professor Teo Yik Ying, Dean of the Saw Swee Hock School of Public Health. Professor, confusion resulting from the cruise passenger testing positive while on board. What is this PCR test on the cruise? Is it robust enough compared to the ones used to generate results by labs?
Thanks for having me back. I think we will need to wait for additional information to be given on what PCR testing protocol is being deployed on board the cruise ship. I suspect it is likely to be one of those point-of-care PCR tests rather than what we've been hearing about usually, which is the real-time or the RT-PCR test. The reason for her differentiating between the point-of-care PCR test and the RT-PCR test is that if it is indeed the point-of-care test, some of these tests do perform slightly poorly compared to the real-time PCR test. And when I say perform slightly poorer, it means that the ability to find a true infection as well as the ability to correctly identify someone who is uninfected tends to be a little bit lower. It's just a little bit lower. So the real-time PCR test that we've been hearing about all this while is much less likely to make a false positive or a false negative error. But actually, from an objective assessment, much less likely doesn't mean it is a perfectly accurate test as well. So one important highlight here is that there is indeed the possibility that the testing protocol used on board may have a slightly lower accuracy, and we do need to wait for further information to clarify on this.
Now, Prof, two subsequent tests came back last night with negative results, suggesting the initial test could be a false positive. We know tests do generate false positives, but what is a false positive and how can it happen?
So a false positive refers to the situation where the test indicates that someone is infected, but actually the person is healthy and doesn't have any infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So this can happen because some of the tests do have inherent errors that can occasionally, by chance, produce a wrong result. And this is what we always define as the testing performance of, the performance of the test. The test can yield a false positive error, which what we have seen here, it applies in this particular case. But at the same time, there are tests that can produce a false negative error. And I suspect in both situations, we are working very hard to ensure that we minimize such errors, because it's clear that there are huge implications regardless of whether it is a false negative, in which case someone who truly is infected is let loose to circulate and mingle around in the community, or a false positive where there will be implications to cruise ships turning back or people who are actually healthy being prevented from partaking in activities or going up a plane or a cruise ship, for example.
Right. Well, let's throw back to what happened yesterday, Prof. From your observations, how do you think Royal Caribbean handled the entire situation? Any protocols you think that need tightening?
I think yesterday's situation highlighted that the protocols that we have in Singapore, not just for Royal Caribbean, I believe for all cruise liners, is a very prudent one. The moment that someone tests positive, the priority is always focusing on how do we protect everyone else on board and to minimize the spread. So I do think that that highlights that the current protocol that we have works, and it's one that prioritizes safety and well-being of everyone on board, particularly the passengers. In terms of protocols that need tightening, I suppose, given that we may potentially be seeing an erroneous test result, I think that's where we need to look into the validity and the deployment of many of these tests, particularly those rapid tests that can yield results in a very short time. Because we do know that some of these tests, the speed comes at a compromise for the accuracy. And we have already discussed how errors can have very big impact on both the economic implications as well as the safety implications of passengers and people on board.
Now, if anything, Prof, yesterday's sequence of events was a necessary test for the Safe Cruise pilot scheme. But do you think there were any negative repercussions?
Well, clearly to those passengers who were on board, their holidays were cut short, and there was quite a significant degree of fear amongst those who may have already been in contact with the supposed infected person. But I think coming back to the point that it highlights that the management system that the cruise industry has put in place at the moment is able to safeguard the well-being and continues to prioritize that in such a situation. And I do see this to be an important lesson that we will have to take as we move forward, because it will not just be the cruise sector, the cruise industry that will encounter some of these false results. There will be other settings, including Singapore hosting the World Economic Forum that is coming up in May. We are opening up our nightclub activities, our nightlife activities. More meetings and conventions and conferences will happen in Singapore, which will rely on greater degree of test. How we handle the false positives that occur is just as important as how we handle the false negatives. Right now, I'm actually quite confident that the protocols that we have in place in Singapore is able to handle some of the false negatives. False negatives means that we accidentally let in someone who actually has an infection, and that person may go on to spread the infection to others. We may have primary, secondary spread, but the contact tracing, the ring fencing that we have in Singapore at the moment, I believe is very watertight. It will help to manage the problem of false negatives. The issue with false positive is one that is trickier because it sends a degree of fear. It sends a degree of what do we do with the event or with, for example, the cruise ship or a plane load of passengers. Those are some of the protocols that we do need to learn from and also perhaps implement additional tests whenever we are deploying some of these rapid tests and we find a positive result.
Right. Well, good points as always from you, Professor Teo. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We've been speaking to Professor Teo Yik Ying. He's the Dean of the Salisbury Hawk School of Public Health at NUS.
Meanwhile, 6 new COVID-19 cases were confirmed today, all imported and placed on stay-home notices upon their arrival here.
Now, it's the 5th straight day that 0 local infections were reported. The Health Ministry will share more details tonight.
In local headlines, nearly 5,500 healthcare sector jobs are on offer, and 3 in 4 of them are long-term positions. Around 1,500 of these long-term jobs are in professional and executive roles like nurses, allied health professionals, and finance and HR executives. The other 2,550 long-term job openings are support roles such as healthcare assistants, therapy assistants, and patient service associates. Support and administrative support roles make up majority of the short-term jobs on offer.
Homegrown cupcake chain 12 Cupcakes pleaded guilty today to 15 charges of underpaying 7 of its foreign employees in 2017 and 2018. It even shortchanged one worker by about half the wages at times. 14 other similar charges will be taken into consideration during sentencing, which is expected to take place on January the 7th.
Cathay and Golden Village may merge to form the largest cinema operator in Singapore. Both cinema owners have entered a heads-of agreement for the possible merger. As part of the deal, the two companies aim to bring in new investors to inject more capital into the combined venture. Not noting the advent of content streaming and growth of videos on social media, MM2 Asia, which owns Cathay, said the merger would result in a stronger platform for the cinema operations.
Well, moving overseas, a Singaporean doctor was among the first few in the UK to receive Pfizer's Covid-19 vaccine. Dr. Martin Tan received the first of his 2 vaccine jabs in London yesterday, where he's a health officer doing his rotation in respiratory medicine. He received his vaccine early because his work entails direct contact with Covid-19 patients. Dr. Tan said it's a balance of risk and benefit, and that he accepts the risks given the benefits of the vaccine.
Well, China's aviation regulator has recommended cabin crew on charter flights to high-risk Covid-19 destinations to wear disposable diapers and avoid using the bathroom to reduce the risk of infection. Well, the advice comes in a 38-page list of guidelines for airlines to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. The diaper advice is in a section on personal protective equipment, which also recommends cabin crew to don, among others, medical protective masks and double-layer disposable medical rubber gloves.
SpaceX's Starship rocket prototype may have successfully launched on Wednesday, but it hit the ground too fast and exploded upon landing. This, the latest test in the development of next-generation spacecraft by SpaceX, the rocket company owned by Elon Musk, who hopes to one day send people to Mars on the rocket. Well, despite crashing, the test was an advance in SpaceX's efforts. Earlier prototypes disintegrated during tests without even leaving the ground. Well, time for our live weekend picks, Christmas edition. With 15 days to go until Christmas, I hope the spirit of this festive season hasn't been dampened, even though our traditional parties have to be smaller this year.
Journalist Anjali Raguraman has some ideas on how to keep the good times going over Christmas. Anjali, no big parties for Christmas, but how can families still live the holiday spirit?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Christmas is going to be a toned-down affair this year, naturally, because we have restrictions on group sizes, and but how people are getting around that is that they're going to start celebrating earlier. So over the course of 24th, 25th and 26th December, they're going to have smaller parties and more curated experiences. So like I've spoken to a few people, and one of the families, this couple called Subhashini and Prakash, they're more used to hosting like 40 to 50 people usually in their homes for Christmas. But this year they're going to be doing like several parties with 5 people at a time, and they're going to have super curated menus, bespoke cocktails, and when I spoke to Subhashini, she said it helps to have smaller groups so you can have more one-on-one time, because when you have like 40-50 people over, your FaceTime with all your guests is very minimal, and she quite appreciates that, and I think a lot of families will be doing the same this year.
Right. Well, we can't let you go without talking about this element that's usually part of any celebration. I think one of Anjali's favorites as well, talking about drinks and cocktails. So Anjali, are beverage retailers seeing a slowdown this year?
Not at all, actually. They're seeing a spike, if anything, because we basically have a captive audience in Singapore that can't travel. So what beverage retailers that I spoke to, and big brands, alcohol brands basically, they say that they've seen a lot of home consumption, and resulting in that they've all set up specialized shops on e-commerce platforms like Lazmall and Shopee and GrabMart, and they've seen a massive spike in that, whether it's champagne or spirits, like William Grant & Son, which owns Balvenie, Glenfiddich, Monkey Shoulder, all these whiskeys. They say they've seen a massive spike in sales that have been made off e-commerce, and I think it's just reflective of how like people are making the best of it. Like back to Subhashini again, like what she's going to be doing as well this year is, because she has family from the UK that can't come back in time or can't come back at all because they have a very young family and quarantining is not an option. So what they're going to be doing is making the best of it. They're having dinner at 7:30 p.m. in Singapore and setting up a Zoom call with the family in London who are joining them at lunchtime, and they set up the laptop at the end of the table and they're all going to eat together and dine together. It's just the spirit of making the best of the situation. And she has a lovely quote that, you know, the situation is going to be a new norm, and if we don't find a way to celebrate, we're going to wait indefinitely for the joy to come. So no one is going to wait for that anymore. I think we're just going to celebrate it as it is.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Anjali. That was well said. You've been speaking to journalist Anjali Raguraman.
With many people celebrating at home, eateries have had to rethink their offerings for Christmas and prepare for a surge in takeaways and deliveries.
Well, joining us is food correspondent Eunice Quek. So Eunice, if you're looking to have a Christmas meal, whether at home or at a restaurant, finishing a whole turkey can be challenging if your group is limited to, no more than 5 people. So how have some places altered their menu to accommodate smaller servings?
Many restaurants, they have streamlined their menus for different group sizes. And so it's generally between, say, 2 to 10 people, average of about 5 or so for just nice, the group size that is allowed. And you can expect to see a lot more roast chicken this year instead of turkey. And a lot of places are getting more creative as well with how they use turkey. So for example, casual restaurants like Swenson's, Deli France, they offer roast chicken options in their sets. A good idea is that the Goodwood Park Hotel, they actually offer a ha cheong or prawn paste turkey, where the turkey basically comes chopped up. So really easy to eat. Everyone can just grab a leg, grab a bite. And they also have like mini turkeys, shepherd's pie, and shredded turkey with leek in sesame pockets. So all these ideas, really good for small parties, easy to finish. So most importantly, no waste. And you can also get, to finish off, you want to have some really nice festive desserts. Paul Bakery, they offer half-sized log cakes. You can kind of mix and match them around. You can get their mini tarts, their mini canapes, and very easy to finish or keep if you really need to.
Right, so generally just smaller servings of food, yeah? Now Christmas is the season of giving. Back in the circuit breaker period, we saw many people sending food to family and friends. Is there a Christmas version of this, Eunice?
Oh, definitely food gifting is the way to go this season. And many people will do that. Even myself, trying to plan, what to send to friends and family that I know I'm definitely most likely not going to see this period, or not so soon at least. So you can, restaurants, hotels, they're all offering, quite a good array of hampers. You can put together your own, you can add in your own, snacks, desserts and all that. Selected restaurants under the Paradise Group, you can order like dim sum platters, seafood platters, even if it's not for your own consumption, send them along to a family or friend. Swenson's, they offer this, what they call a giftmas parcel. Basically, it's a meal in a box with like roast chicken, you get meat platters, you get sides, and very handy, easy to eat. You get a meal, basically a good festive meal that comes nice and handy, and you can add on even more stuff to it if you're catering for a slightly bigger family.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Eunice. That was Eunice Quek, food correspondent for the Straits Times. Olivia, I think I know what I'm going to get for you for Christmas now. Last week we talked about the chocolatier, but hey, I guess I have new ideas now as well.
All right, thank you so much in advance then.
Yes.
Well, look out for the live special this Sunday on Christmas without the things we're used to, like what to do since there's no caroling, and even hot, spicy recipe ideas for an alternative to the usual ham and turkey dinner.
Well, for more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below. Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quek. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.